Well, less than a month to go for the union budget, the government is considering another one-time amnesty scheme to reduce tax litigation. Sources say the tax department is studying the possible contours to expedite more than 33,000 customs cases worth over 38,000 crore rupees. The government has collected more than 90,000 crore rupees from dispute resolution schemes that were announced in 2019 and 2020. Timsy standing by with the details. Timsy, what stage is this proposal at and can be expected to be introduced in the upcoming budget?
Well, sources are indicating that the government is considering to introduce a new one-time amnesty scheme to reduce litigation. Revenue Department is currently contemplating such a scheme for both direct and indirect tax disputes, and if approved, the schemes could be part of the budget announcements. According to sources, the idea is based on the past success of dispute resolution schemes which were announced in the past, such as SVL-DRS for indirect taxes and Vivad Se Vishwas for direct taxes. The proposal under works at CBDT is to give chance to taxpayers to come forward in the scheme on self-declaration, expanding the ambit of cases covered under appeals at various forums, allowing withdrawal of appeals on payment of full tax, interest and penalty, allowing amnesty with a penalty of 10% and 20% depending where the cases are stuck. Similarly, in case of indirect taxes, the proposal is to cover custom duty dispute matters, again based on self-declaration, giving chance to taxpayers to come forward. Here too, the idea is immunity from interest and penalty in quantums depending where the matters are stuck and how much of the disputed amount the taxpayer is willing to pay. It is understood that over 33,000 custom duty cases are stuck in litigation worth about 40,000 crore rupees, and once such a scheme is approved, this could unlock a major value. Let's see what finally budget unveils for the industry and taxpayers.
All right, Timsy, appreciate you joining us. Joining us to take this conversation forward is Dinesh Kanabar, the CEO at Dhruva Advisors. Mr. Kanabar, many thanks for joining us. As we pointed out, we've seen amnesty schemes being announced by the government in 2019, then in 2020. And at this point in time, indications suggest that they could be working on another one. Your initial reactions to what you just heard?
Well, first, to be politically correct, there are no amnesty schemes because that's the proposition that the government has given to the Supreme Court to say we will not come out with any more amnesty schemes. The schemes which have come out really are very targeted. So if you take the Vivad Se Vishwas, was really to go back and say, if your matters are pending in litigation and you want to withdraw the appeals, then come forward, pay your taxes and withdraw the appeals, which is not exactly an amnesty scheme, but it's really going back to say, don't litigate. And again, I was reading Timsy's tweet, which made very interesting reading. So, for example, in the context of direct taxes, what she hears and what therefore could be under contemplation is that if you have got matters which are pending in appeal and you are litigating something and you think it's not worth your while, or there's a subsequent judgment which has come, which is unlikely to sustain whatever you are saying, then please pay your taxes, taxes and interest, and maybe you will not have to pay the penalty or a token penalty, etc. I think really what is needed, what has happened, Shirin, is that over a period of time, while the tax tribunal has become very robust, in fact, these days, when you file an appeal before the tribunal, it comes up for hearing within months in most locations. But there is a clogging at commissioner appeals level. It takes almost 15 years for a matter to be heard at the High Court, which is not a desirable thing. The government has done a few things, which is to set up those higher limits for threshold, etc., which has helped. But we really need to declog the system. And what I read from the tweet is to say that if you filed an appeal and you withdraw the appeal by paying interest and penalty, or other interest and taxes, that's a very, very welcome thing. It will declog the system. A couple of days ago, there was a statement by the finance minister that there are some trillions of rupees which are stuck up in tax litigation. The government can sort of recover some of those monies. So all in all, a very, very welcome thing. In fact, something which could be sort of an ongoing thing to say that if you are in litigation and you want to settle, please settle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right in pointing out that this is not necessarily an amnesty scheme per se. It really is an attempt to try and end litigation and bring closure to uncertainty, which, as you point out, in some cases could go on for years, given the kind of clogging that you spoke of. But, you know, in terms of the contours, and we don't have the fine print of the details, this is still a matter under consideration and a proposal that's being drawn up. There have been previous recommendations made as well, for instance, by the Akhilesh Ranjan panel. You know, what do you believe the government will need to be mindful of to make this fly, if in fact it does come up with this?
So the Akhilesh Ranjan task force had come up with sort of a number of recommendations. And while these recommendations were never made public, but from what one picked on, that was very far-reaching. So in fact, that committee seems to have suggested a mediation, which is to say that if a tax officer comes back with a notice to say, here is a demand, you could actually enter into a negotiated settlement the way it happens in the UK and in certain other jurisdictions, and agree to settle the matter with the government. And that did not find favor. And I would like to believe that any suggestion which speaks of a settlement will not find any favor with the government, because that is likely to be challenged in future by the investigating authorities, whether there was a favor done, etc., etc. Whereas what we are now seeing, and which probably makes sense, is that this is a settlement under the scheme itself. So a tax officer has raised a demand. You have challenged the addition made before an appellate officer. You now think this is not worth doing it, and therefore you pay your taxes. Or matters have gone on for years, your company has grown, these sums are now inconsequential, you want to do an IPO, all of this, the litigation is becoming a challenge. Why not go and simply pay the taxes and settle the matter? Where things could be a little bit tricky is, for example, that SSC has won a matter before Commissioner Appeals. It is the tax office is before the tribunal, and there is a settlement. Then nobody would want to pay full taxes. So something like what was done in the Vivad Se Vishwas, where it was provided that if you have succeeded in the last appeal, pay 50% of the taxes, something like that could be a very, very welcome thing. But I don't think that the government will go as far as to accept a recommendation of a negotiated settlement, which is by definition subjective and not objective.
Right. Well, we will have to wait to see what the government finally unfolds and whether or not this finds its way into the budget. But Mr. Kanabar, always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here to take us through your reaction to the story broken by our colleague Timsy Jaipuria. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of Business 360. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay tuned. Our 5-day favorite, the CNBC-TV18 Editors Roundtable, continues after this short break.